Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. Okay, so let's move on to the third and final item today, which is the recent decision, which I was looking up a second ago because I don't remember the decision name, in federal court that, let me sort of rewind a little bit. In February, there was a comic book that was submitted for copyright registration to the U.S. Copyright Office. And I don't remember the name of the comic book, but that had a mix of original text and then images generated by Midjourney, which looked very much like the celebrity Zendaya, the central character, female protagonist, was sort of based on her. But putting that aside, sort of appropriation of somebody's likeness, the Copyright Office first granted a copyright to the full work, and then later reversed itself with respect to the images and said, these were created by AI, they're not copyrightable. You cannot copyright something if there isn't sufficient human involvement. That's sort of the sort of layperson's bottom line. There was a separate case unrelated to the comic book that was testing that proposition that an AI generated work couldn't be copyrighted. And I'm not going to get into the facts of that case, but last week there was a federal court decision. Interestingly, Beryl Howard, I believe, is the judge's name, and that's a woman, if I'm not mistaken. Fowler versus Perlmutter, and the judge affirmed the Copyright Office's position that there must be sufficient human involvement in order for a work to qualify for copyright protection. The facts of that case are sort of unique because they basically said in an administrative proceeding that the work was, I believe it was a generative AI imagery, was created by AI. And then later they tried to sort of insert more human involvement in the case, and the court said, we're not gonna bite. But the reason I bring it up is because it raises a really fundamental question about all of this AI work that's going on and whether it's protected. So simply because you use AI in creating a piece of content doesn't mean that it's disqualified from protection. But there's a question of an unanswered question about how much human involvement needs to be there. And presumably in this comic book case, there was a human creating prompts, right? Creating original prompts. And so by implication, that was not enough by itself to protect those images. So it raises this interesting question that that will need to be answered by the Supreme Court or somebody. Like, what is the degree of human curation, involvement, management of the AI content creation process that will give it protection? Because if you don't have protection, then somebody can create all these great pieces of copy and text and blog articles and whatever, and somebody could just come along and rip it off and there are no consequences. So,
to me, a royalty-free image world is sort of my dream. It's just every image is created by AI, and every image is thus reusable. If you find one that's appropriate, to me, that's not a bad outcome, right?
Well, but what about companies? What about let's bring it into our world. Let's say there are brands and marketers who spend a lot of time creating. They're creating a brand image, and they're creating content for websites, and they're creating blog posts, and they're creating other kinds of things using AI very heavily, relying on AI. Then some competitor in their field comes along and basically just takes it all. Isn't that a problem?
It's happening now. Moz articles get replicated and replicated and replicated.
Well, you're right.
It's been a problem right along, and nobody's done anything about it. So I guess, ultimately it comes down to the fact that Moz's brand is worth something, so people go to Moz to read it.
That's right.
And to Google's credit, they have properly identified the canonical source of the original text that people are ripping off. It happened with the local search ranking factors, probably as early as 2009. I remember, getting all these weird WordPress pings from all the sites that had ripped it off. And even back then, Google still was able to identify the canonical source. So I think, yeah, Greg, like it's bad that a competitor can just reprint somebody's entire work, but I do think that like the number of eyeballs on that work is still dependent on Google in so many cases, and they actually seem to be doing a good job in this event. So
Well, so then
Or
Google becomes the sort of de facto regulator of
yeah,
content authenticity.
that's right. Which, well, not just authenticity, but like, I mean, we were just talking in the green room. Like, in many ways, they're sort of the regulator of content visibility online as well. So,
Well, totally,
um,
totally.
yeah.
there was an interesting situation I ran across with Amazon where an author that my wife likes was both impersonated at Amazon and had an AI written book submitted in her name. So now at
Wow.
Amazon, there's two of these authors. One has AI generated crap, and the other has the real deal. What? I mean, there's a situation where this person is directly impacted by the
Hmm.
policies and failures of the platform to even vet that this is really an author. Um,
Well,
so
and there was an article, I don't know where it initially appeared, Wired or another publication like that, where they were showing a lot of travel content, new travel guides, I believe it was. Lots and lots of sort of AI generated books now showing up on Amazon. And Amazon, I mean, it's a version of the review fraud problem in a way, only much more, sort of much worse. I suppose if you purchased a book and it turned out to be not what you expected, you could get a refund from Amazon. They would do that, but it just adds more garbage into the Amazon ecosystem. More fraudulent, inauthentic content.
how would
And
you know it wasn't written by this person? You would end up ultimately besmirching this person's reputation, which is really the problem. Here, it's not just the crazy website stealing the local search ranking factors, it's the crazy website stealing the domain name and the local search
Hmm.
ranking factors, right? I mean,
well,
it's
and it
like
dilutes
you can't
your
even build it, dilutes the brand, right? So if the
it
brand is
dilutes the
what
brand.
protects you, then you don't even have that in the case of Amazon. So
Well,
it's
and
complicated.
and with Section 230 in this country, the Amazon or anybody else in that position is not responsible, not liable. I mean, they have a certain level of integrity in their own results that they try to enforce, but they're not liable for any of that. And so it's up to the individual, the aggrieved party, the author, to then go after the fraudster, which is often going to be difficult, if not impossible. So, I mean, I would imagine, to come back to the legal issue, I would imagine that AI and copyright is going to play out like fair use, where if somebody raises fair use as a defense, there's multiple factors that a court will look at. Was it done for profit? Was it, how much of the work is being reproduced? There's like a multiple prong test that the court will engage in to determine if fair use is a valid defense against infringement. And we're going to get something like that here. It's like, how much human involvement was the human generating the idea, and were they involved in the process, and was there some editorial control? And it'll be a kind of case by case thing, often which will come down to enforcement. Right? It's a practical matter. You can say whatever you want in the law, but if there's no enforcement, then it doesn't mean anything. I think it's a fascinating issue and an important issue. But I don't know if anybody's behavior. There were all these articles about how Hollywood may think twice about creating AI generated scripts and AI generated content if it can't be protected. And I think in those cases there'll be sufficient human involvement to warrant or give protection. But it's an interesting wrinkle in this whole debate, which is probably something most people aren't thinking about at all.
Well, the only comment I have is that people should steal our images at Near Media, which I'm quite proud of having generated them with Midjourney. Had a lot of fun trying to create a visual metaphor off a bad written metaphor.
Well,
So we'll see.
I can tell you, as somebody who's done a version of that myself, that it takes a lot of effort to
It does.
create the prompt that will yield the image that you want. So there is quite a bit of human involvement in that, even though the machine is ultimately responsible. And one of the analogous things that was talked about in the case is photography, where you've got a machine, a mechanical process, which is creating the and producing the image, but they said it was distinct from AI because there was a lot of human creativity in sort of the composition and conceptualizing things. And it's really not that different in creating a prompt to generate content.
In fact, you look at an iPhone, it's basically an AI generated image.
Right.
I mean,
Yep.
So.
Yeah.
All right.
And next week, our AI generated avatars will be back with more. Our AI generated voices and AI generated avatars. Soon, this will be an entirely automated podcast. All right. So thanks for listening. Subscribe to Near Media and tell your friends, and we will be back next week.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.